As many of you know, I'm concerned about the future and about where humanity is going next in their evolution. Robots, AI, super AI, transhumanism is all on the horizon, in fact probably happening right now. So I've been making different little shows over the years on AI and robots. And as many of you know, I used to think that robots and that was all great. The future of our technology is going to lead us far and wide. But now I'm a bit concerned as to what it's going to do for us. I'd like to think that it was there to help us. I've been reading M W Thring's books on robots, and I wanted to read some of the chapters, not all of them, but some of the interesting theories that he puts across. And many of you might know that Thring himself was in the Gurdjieff Work. So I'm going to start with chapter 1 from Robots and Telechairs by M W Thring. Now this was published in 1983, and I think it's quite relevant for today. Chapter 1. What does man want from slave machines? 1. Man wants and needs. Ancient civilizations were based very largely on the use of human slaves to do those tasks which the rich and powerful owners of the slaves did not wish to do. The civilization of the countries which had the benefits of the Industrial Revolution is based essentially on the idea that we use machines powered by fossil fuels both to do those tasks which we do not wish to do, and also to enable us to do things like rapid travel or hearing and seeing remote performances, which were not available to our ancestors and to earlier civilizations. On the other hand, there has always run through civilizations the same religious idea that hard work and even menial work was necessary for the proper inner self-development of an individual. The development of the computer and the microprocessor have led to the possibility that we could develop mechanical slaves to free a substantial fraction of the world's population from the manual work connected with the production of food and manufactured goods. It is true that after the first generation of senseless robots has been on the market for 20 years, there are still only about 15,000 of them in the whole world, more than half of this number being in Japan, whereas the number of manual workers engaged in production of food and manufactured goods in the world is more than 1,000 million, so that there is only one robot to every 100,000 people. It is also true that robots require a great deal more energy, admittedly supplied in the form of fossil fuel rather than food, than a human doing the same job, and they require both fossil fuel and other limited resources such as metal ores to make them. It is probable that these limitations will mean that there will never be more than a few 100,000 robots in the world. So for two reasons we have to consider very carefully what are the most appropriate fields of application of robots and other humanoid machines. 1. Because of the limited resources of fossil fuels and metal ores available to the very large number of people on the earth, and the still greater number that will arise in the future. 2. Because there may be something in the idea of the value of physical work to human beings. This latter question also relates to the common and well-justified fear that robots will throw humans out of work. Indeed, the economic reason that most factories employ robots is that they are cheaper than humans for the same job, especially if they work 2 shifts or even 3. From the human point of view, the idea of using a robot to throw a person out of work is clearly highly unsatisfactory, since normal human beings would much rather do a job than be paid money for doing nothing, provided they feel the job is worth doing. Moreover, it costs the country so much to pay them for doing nothing that on a national basis the economic benefit to the firm is totally destroyed. Potential good results. Helping handicapped people to live a more normal life, such as powerful artificial arms and legs, powered carriages, elimination of danger and discomfort at work, increase of available resources and reduction of wastage, recycling, avoidance of drudgery and boring repetitive work, increase of human knowledge of the universe and of man's significance in it. Potential bad results. Unfortunately, however, there are also 5 potentially bad results of an unthinking pursuit of sophisticated technology in these directions, resulting from three short-sighted motives as follows: the pursuit of immediate monetary profit, solving problems for their excitement and interest regardless of their consequences, war preparations. The potentially bad results of sophisticated machines are as followed: increased unemployment in the developed countries. If in the long term we have to have a job for everyone, then the short-term objective of using robots because they are cheaper than humans is in itself a move away from a stable society. Moreover, it is an economic fallacy, which we can call the robot fallacy. In most cases, because the total saving to the nation when we include the loss of workers, income tax and the payment of unemployment pay becomes negative. When, therefore, it is decided to use robots for some of the good reasons given above, this contributes to the general problem of providing an interesting and worthwhile job for everyone in a mechanised society. The excessive use of limited resources, e.g. fossil fuels, oil, coal, natural gases, metal ores. Animals or fish species destruction, despoliation of land by concrete and monoculture and fresh water depletion. Putting humans into jobs where they are more isolated or do less interesting work, e.g. computer programmers and assembly belt workers. Pollution and danger to public health. Accidents to humans caused by sophisticated robots. Many people, when considering the possibilities of robots, have envisaged a future for mankind in which all physical tasks are done by robots, and the whole of these activities is operated and maintained by a relatively small number of technocrats working 10 or 20 hours a week. On this world picture, the rest of humanity is rather unemployed or engaged in a human service activity. This worldview is totally incompatible with both the limitations of raw materials, agricultural land, water and fresh air, and equally is totally inconsistent with the essential characteristics of human nature. Every human being has a lazy side, which would lead him to prefer to make no efforts at all, and the traditional weapon used by society to overcome this laziness is the simple economic one of no food without work, and it is remarkable how necessary the economic motive, coupled to pride in one's possessions, is to effective and hard work in the two cases of growing crops and looking after one's home. The best examples of the really efficient use of land are those where the farmer or smallholder combines improvement of his own economic position with the pride of achievement. Similarly, houses are most economically maintained and improved when the owner-occupier is personally responsible for them. The ordinary human being also has more subtle motives, such as the desire to earn his or her living by something which they feel emotionally is of real value to other people, whether on the small scale, as in the bringing up of children, or on the large scale, as helping to feed a starving nation. Another more subtle motive is the desire to express oneself through original creative work, and yet another is the feeling that it is good for one's own self-development to struggle against one's laziness by wise effort. To satisfy all these basic human motives requires an entirely different kind of society, a form of machine-served utopia, in which the machines are used only sufficiently to enable everyone to have a decent standard of living within the Earth's resources, and to earn this without excessive drudgery or repetition, and without danger. In this book, robots and telechairs and their development, both theoretical and practical, will be described with this kind of possible future world in mind, rather than the technocratic society or the use of robots and telechairs for purposes of destruction. This kind of society may be called a creative society, because the profit motive would be used only to the point of enabling everybody to earn enough of everything, and their extra abilities and energies could be directed towards fulfilling their fundamental creative instinct. Since we are concerned with man-like machines, it is necessary to mention at this point one other important fact of observation about the human system. This is the fact that a human being has 3 separate brains, and this concept is clearly stated in the account of Gurdjieff's teaching given on page 53 of In Search of the Miraculous by P. D. Ouspensky. So this is the fact that a human being has three separate brains which work at different speeds and are educated by different means and have entirely different functions. These brains may work together, they may interfere with each other, or they may be working entirely unconnectedly, as when a human in a factory carries out some routine task with the hands and eyes, with the body brain or physical brain, while there is some imaginary conversation going on in the head or intellectual brain, and there is a seething in the background of depression, anger or boredom in the emotional brain. The functions of the three brains are listed in figure 1.1. All truly creative work requires the coming together of the three brains as discussed in my book, written in conjunction with Professor E. Laithwaite, How to Invent. The emotional brain has to provide the tremendous power to leap into the dark away from accepted thinking, while the intellectual brain gives a logical analysis of the problem with as little rigidity as possible, and the physical brain provides the essential direct knowledge of reality. After a new idea has been thought of, the critical faculty in the intellectual brain is switched on to consider whether it is contrary to the known laws of physics, chemistry or medicine. Many inventions, such as the ability of an ordinary person to learn to balance a bicycle, would clearly have seemed to be contrary to experience until they were tested. The conversion of an idea into reality always involves the physical brain with its experiential understanding of static space and force relationships, kinematics and kinetics. This next chapter is from Man, Machines and Tomorrow, also by M W Thring. And I'm reading certain chapters because the rest of his books are about how we can use computers and robots to work with us, which is also what Rudolf Steiner used to be telling us. He was saying that we need to be working with the artificial intelligence that's coming, not have it working against us or taking us over, and not necessarily working for us. We want to be working together. So this next chapter is from M W Thring, Man, Machines and Tomorrow, and he's called this chapter Suicide or Survival. There is an inventor in all of us. Man, Homo sapiens, is genetically curious, adaptive and exploratory. He will explore for exploring's sake and seek the solution of a problem because the problem is there. The inventor, the researcher, uses his imagination in the same way as the artist. To achieve his best work, he may well have to suffer the same agony of mind and need the same singleness of purpose to reach success. Success, too, when it comes, holds the same sense of self-fulfillment, a pleasure, pride and peace that has a true value no matter what turmoil of change is affecting other aspects of the inventor's life. We are all living through a period of turmoil. This has been analysed by many writers. Alvin Toffler, for example, in his book Future Shock, has written, "A growing body of reputable opinion asserts that the present movement represents nothing less than the second great divide in human history, comparable in magnitude only with that first break in historic continuity, the shift from barbarism to civilization." End quote. He speaks of, quote, dizzying disorientation and fears that the malaise, mass neurosis and free-floating violence already apparent in contemporary life are merely a foretaste of what may lie ahead unless we come to understand and treat this disease. End quote. I myself believe that no pace of change would cause dizzying disorientation if people felt their progress to be in the right direction, that is to say, a direction natural to human beings in satisfying their inbuilt idealism, their onward-upward urge. I feel that the malaise, mass neurosis and free-floating violence have come about because we have only used our new technology to give us a self-indulgent, one-up on the Joneses way of life. This, as we are proving, does not work. What our Victorian ancestors used to call the primrose path seems pleasant and easy to tread at its beginning, and at first even leads to actual happiness in its contrast with the straightened and narrow life many of us had led before. But after a while pleasure in possession reaches a saturation point and there is disillusionment. I believe we have in the industrially developed countries collectively reached this point. Therefore it is time to try a new path. The question is, which path should we take? We seem to be at a crossroads. The older generation tend to want to go back along the way we have come, to find the patterns of living that was conventional in their own youth. But a great deal of good as well as bad has come with the permissive society and the meritocracy, and no one would really want this good to be lost. At the other extreme, the more fanatical among the young want to destroy all that remains of establishment order and start again with a clean slate. The young anarchists' ideas after destruction, however, tend to be less well defined, and anyone who has lived through a world war or even studied the history of violent revolutions has learned that destruction for its own sake is only retrogressive. We need constructive planning, not destruction or nostalgia. Fanaticism and dreams have never solved anything. We need to keep our feet on the firm ground of practicality and moderation. In these circumstances, it seems to me that an engineer may put forward as valid a solution as anyone to some of the world's problems. Engineers are, after all, essentially practical and moderate men. They have to be. Their ideas have to be made to work in socially and financially realistic terms. The steam engine was in operation long before the law of thermodynamics was defined as a theory. Engineers have to think with their hands and in 3 dimensions. However beautiful the draftsmanship of a working drawing, it is no use at all unless the object it depicts works in the round. Unless an invention can be marketed at a price the majority of its potential users can afford, then it will have failed its purpose as surely as if it had failed to work mechanically. Yet the most technically and economically practical solutions will also have desirably aesthetic beauty and social value. Furthermore, the inventor's ideas may change the whole world's way of living, so that he may think in the round too, in terms of responsibility. In this book I want to begin by looking briefly at the great achievements of engineers and scientists, particularly over the past 2 centuries, and to assess their work insofar as it has helped or threatened mankind. No one will belittle the enormous benefits technology and medicine have brought us. Discovery upon discovery has eased mankind's lot and lengthened our lifespan, yet the whole world stands under the 3-fold threat of destruction by nuclear war, by famine, or by the poisoning of our natural environment. R. Buckminster Fuller has written in Utopia or Oblivion, quote, "So I say to you that man on earth is now clearly faced with the choice of utopia or oblivion. If he chooses the latter, he can go right on leaving his fate to his political leaders. If, however, he chooses utopia, he must get busy very fast." End quote. To me, also, speed seems essential. Charles A. Reich in The Greening of America has seen our salvation in education, formal education and education through the media, which will create a climate of consciousness that may eventually inspire people to persuade their politicians to cure the world's ills. I agree that education is the long-term answer, but I think we need to take more positive and immediate action as well. The quality of life for the individual living in the industrially developed countries is already arguably lower than it was at the beginning of the century. What many have gained in social freedom we have all lost in noise, dirt, monotony in our work, lack of purpose in living, and any close relationship with natural things. Also, this quality in our way of living is becoming progressively less high. We poison our environment daily to the point where, if we go on, as we are going, life in our cities will become intolerable before the end of the century, if we survive so long. Only a scientist can know how imminent is the danger of destruction, in the first place by pollution, although hunger could follow and be followed in its turn by war. In reaching a saturation point in the demand for possessions, we are already facing unemployment. This could rise to 50% of the population by the year 2000. 50% of all people could then feel degraded, discontented and anxious, and be therefore easily roused to find a solution in war. And this could become fact even in the wealthy, industrially developed countries. In the underdeveloped countries, the help given at the present time is worse than useless, because it is operated either by businessmen out to make a profit, or else by power blocks competing with each other. The result is that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, with the consequent spread of starvation and misery. Unless we can change the world's social motives and build a society that rations paid work, that educates to give everyone a chance to feel valuable and self-fulfilled in his community, that reorganises the world's food supplies to wipe out malnutrition, then deterioration will begin and lead to want and then to war. And we all know that war now means total annihilation. So we must act if we are to survive. We are already acting, particularly by teaching. The young of this generation, educated, do have ideals, but it will be a long time before they are experienced enough to win real power. It is up to an older generation to lead them, and I would like to put forward the idea that perhaps engineers and scientists might be good people to make a start in this. Since we brought to the world the inventions that have created the dilemma, we might set our record straight by being the people to find a way out of it. Engineers alone, after all, can foresee and make the machines that a new type of social system would need. Scientists alone know how to go about such diverse practical questions as reorganising food supplies, finding the causes and cures of pollution, and harnessing natural resources. Also, we already form an international community. We already get together and talk about these things. Our main difficulty in helping the rest of the world, however, may be that of communication. In general, historically, we engineers and scientists have tended to become intellectually isolated from our contemporaries who deal in the arts and humanities. Talking among ourselves through mathematics and the jargon of our specialist subjects, it may not be easy for us to state our ideas clearly and comprehensibly to people whose minds have been trained to other disciplines. Yet I believe we must do this, and that such an exchange of information is an essential part of any final plan for mankind's survival. All men everywhere must exchange information and work out a formula for future living that will allow us to gain the full benefit from invention without its present counterbalancing dangers. Psychologists tell us that the most powerful urges in human beings are the creative urge and the destructive urge, but I am optimistic enough to think that our collective life wish is stronger than our death wish, and that if we can all work together we shall, with luck, save ourselves yet. Fear has divided us in the past. Fear should now bring us together. Fear may cause us, even as individuals, either to shrink away or else to become aggressive. We may lose from an encounter or make the other person feel small. If we can break down the barriers of fear and begin to exchange ideas on a person-to-person basis, we shall all grow and not shrink. But just as we need freedom from fear in order to improve social conditions, to achieve this absence of fear, social conditions must be made right. We must be freed as soon as possible from the basic anxieties of having insufficient food, shelter and warmth. We must have reasonable transport facilities, education and medical services. Economic expansion, a wealth-orientated society will remain necessary if an ever-increasing percentage of the world's population is to enjoy this basic security of home, health and food. It is only after that point that the quest for material wealth as an end in itself ceases to bring any lasting sense of satisfaction either to the individual or the community. 200 years ago, when the only power available was that of the horse, the ox, the ass, the wind or the water, and all our clothes and consumer goods were made by men's hands, using only hand tools, no one spoke of life as a rat race. In fact, it is worth a second look at the British way of life as it was at the height and end of the land wealth-based society in the middle of the 18th century. G.M. Trevelyan tells us in British history in the 19th century and after, and in English social history, 1922 and 1942, quote, "Village life embraced the chief daily concerns of the majority of Englishmen, not then a moribund society, but with a considerable measure of equality and independence. The wives and families of the yeomen and agricultural labourers and the labourers themselves, when field work was slack, carried on various branches of manufacture in their own cottages. The smaller country houses contained all the year round the homelier squires. In country houses great and small, life was lived at its fullest. The zeal for estate management and agricultural improvement took the squire out on his horse at all hours of the day, and the ladies at home had for weeks and months together large parties of visitors, to be entertained with much eating and drinking, with field sports, with music and literature, with cards and dice. Perhaps, says Trevelyan, of the aristocracy of this period, no set of men and women since the world began enjoyed so much different sides of life with so much zest. End quote. No one would want to return to social elitism, yet surely there were qualities in this way of living which, restored, might help us combat the malaise, mass neurosis, and free-floating violence. There was, for instance, a fundamental security for everyone in belonging to a community, a mental stimulus in having variety in daily work, a creative pride in doing skilled work with one's hands, a benefit to health in working out of doors as well as in, companionship in sharing cultural interests, and above all, the success of this formula is proved by the fact that there was, as Trevelyan states, a prevailing zest for living. The need now is to regain the sense of pleasure and purpose in life, without one set of people, anywhere in the world, being the servers, the have-nots, while others are the served, the haves. Progress at this point in history must be intentionally for everyone, worldwide, although the economic practicalities of the last 200 years have led there to being an avant-garde, who may well be reaping the tares as well as the wheat of the Industrial Revolution. Only in the present rich developed countries is there malaise, mass neurosis, and free-floating violence, and in seeking the cure for ourselves we may eventually be able to share with the present underdeveloped states a way of living unencumbered by such disadvantages. Buckminster Fuller has pointed out that, quote, the rate at which each successive country, entering industrialism, accomplishes the full industrialization, constantly accelerates. End quote. Russia tooled up on machinery left on the market because of America's financial crash in 1929. Russia did not buy machines of the type used in England in 1829. She began with a start of 100 years of other people's development and experience. By the time the technological advance Alvin Toffler calls the super-industrial revolution in his book Future Shock reaches the remote villages of Asia, Africa and South America, perhaps we can have advanced to the stage where the way of life into which they are absorbed is not that of malaise, mass neurosis, and free-floating violence, but one that offers undoubted benefit, civilization at its best. What sort of future do we want? All the great civilizations of the past have been slave states. Slaves have performed all the arduous, dull and dangerous work, leaving the free citizens time to study, to travel and to create. Engineers can now give us slave labour again, but this time without degrading any human being. In the chapters that follow I shall describe a way of life derived from and made practical by machines now existing in plan, in prototype or in projected development. They range from robots to computers to teleturex engineering, and every one of them could be in use before the end of the century, given sufficient public interest and financial backing. These machines could free humans to the point where wage earners would only have to work a 40,000-hour working life, a maximum 20-hour week, leaving the rest of their time free to develop all that is highest in mankind. I have been told that I am over-idealistic in thinking that this is what people would do with free time, and certainly there has been plenty of publicity lately, through films, plays, writing and television, for what the zoologist Desmond Morris has called the naked ape. But I believe there is an angel in us as well as ape. I think the preoccupation with our most selfish instincts is as mean and limited an image of truth as the selfishness it condones. Love and courage, generosity, tolerance and self-control are no less admirable today than they have ever been, nor are they less often practiced. They are simply receiving less recognition and encouragement, and this in itself is not good for society. Our recognized good must be a good that benefits us all. The urge to do well, to be approved, is stronger in us than the urge to foul. Our aggressive and go-getting instincts are not bad in themselves. We sometimes need the spur of aggression to bring out the best in us. Equally, though, we need approval for the achievements of our aggression. Public opinion too often gives approval to man's ability to grab more in material wealth than his neighbours. Is that really what we admire? Will we prefer our leaders to have 3 cars, half a dozen television sets, and their hands out for a quick bribe, as has been known often enough among minor tyrants of the modern world? Or would we rather have men who hold ideals of service to their community and of responsibility to their fellow men? I am sure the latter choice would still be made by most people. The majority of us are still basically idealists. All we lack is the strength of purpose and the coordination to see our ideals realised. I shall argue that we must strengthen this purpose. We must make our governments enforce our ideals through our laws and the way we spend our public money. Political priorities at the present time are nonsense. However, they are based essentially on democracy, so that if the public knows what it wants, the politicians have to give the public what it wants. If service to mankind becomes society's demand, then I, even as only one inventor seeking new ways to benefit those fellow human beings who seem most in need of help, could complete work now being done in my laboratory to make life easier for the sick and handicapped, to develop machines to do mining and other dangerous work by remote control, and to make robots that could relieve people from all monotonous, repetitive work in factories. Machines that could improve the quality of human life. I began designing robots when I was 10. I knew nothing of electronics in those days, of course, so I designed only mechanical robots. I had some idea that they would be triggered into action by sound waves so that I could speak words of command in their ears, and they would march away and do my bidding. Needless to say, I never made this work, but it shows that even I at that time assumed that a robot would have something of a human nature. This is not so, of course. Hal in the film 2001 was a delightful fictional character, but he will never be possible in fact. You cannot build emotions into a machine. The heights and depths of love and hate, comprehended on an intellectual and not merely on an instinctive level, are qualities unique to man, and they will remain so. A robot can, of course, be programmed by men to do a great deal of good or a great deal of evil, but it will never have any intrinsic, self-developed moral awareness, however complex its electronic circuits. The housewife's automatic washing machine is a familiar example of a specialized robot. It washes, it rinses, it spins the water out of the clothes, and it turns itself off. But it will only fail to do this job if there is a fault in its mechanism, not because it has taken a dislike to human clothing and is running its own campaign for total nudity. More technically, a robot may be defined as a machine which could be programmed to carry out a series of complex, manipulative operations pre-selected from a wide variety of possibilities, including carrying objects from one place to another via a complex path and varying its movements according to its own observations of its surrounding environment. The Americans have already developed 2 one-handed robots, the Animate and the Veristran, which can be brought or hired to do the work of one man for 24 hours a day without rest or pause. These are, however, senseless robots. That is to say, they can be programmed to a series of several hundred movements, which they will repeat identically whether the objects they have to move are there or not, and whether they have to knock things out of their way or not. I myself have built a more sophisticated robot with 1 sight and 2 touch sensations. This moves along the side of a table until it sees an object on the table, then it stops, puts out a hand, lifts the object off the table and clears it onto a tray. The word teleturex has been proposed for all machines in which a human being controls a mechanical hand or hands at a distance, using the natural skill of his own hands and with feedback of sensory information from the region where the artificial hands are working. Remote control hands seen through closed-circuit television cameras have already been developed for handling radioactive materials. The same principle could be applied to work in dangerous situations, so that a man can do all such work from a safe, comfortable place, and do it just as well as if he were on the spot in, say, a burning building or at the bottom of the sea. I have in my workshop already prototype machines which would enable people paralysed from the waist down to carry on a normal busy life in their own home or in a factory, which would enable the aerophit to work and exercise without pain, which would carry crippled people up and down stairs. To make these machines available to people who need them takes money all too rarely available in our affluent society. To raise it, I have to persuade a manufacturer that he will make a profit. He will want a market survey and estimates and proof that there are enough sufferers to make it worth his while to tool up for mass production. Yet if our priorities were the right ones, our first consideration would be for the people who need these machines. Government money would be found to develop such inventions. A creative society. I shall discuss all this in more detail later, where I shall call my ideal society with its right priorities the creative society. The key to such a way of life would be education in everything that would provide a satisfying answer to the age-old question, what is life for? This education would start by teaching each individual human being to think for him or herself, to be responsible for himself or herself and to other people, and to find the greatest possible sense of self-fulfillment and satisfaction through creative activity, whether this was in the arts, in craft work, in invention, in research, in exploration, in any field, or in teamwork on some socially desirable project. It is hard to define creativeness so as to convey the sense of self-fulfillment I mean in choosing this word as the name for a new society. But I see it as embodying originality, highly trained sensory motor skills, aesthetic appreciativeness, and the striving for high quality that lies in all our natures. A creative society will regain for us a sense of high quality in our daily living, the zest felt by the English country people of the 18th century. We would find this zest and quality in our work, in human relationships, in education, and in service to others. For this to be most practically achieved, I've suggested that people should live in neighbourhoods or communities, individual, village-sized communities or multiple communities linked to form a city. There would be no set way of life for any one community. It would be as different from its neighbours as historical or cultural patterns or people's desires for social experiment would make it. But communities as a way of life could supply such basic needs as the chance for everyone to belong to a group with all the social protection and stability that can afford, the chance for everyone easily to obtain the basic essentials for comfortable everyday living, the chance for travel or other change in the pattern of an individual's living habits without harmful loneliness or disorientation, and the chance to live in an individually chosen way, regardless of race origin, national language, or even, in most cases, the fact of working for a firm in a different culture or location. As I have said, I am an optimist. I have envisioned my creative society as being established by about the year 2000, when I may even still be alive to see it. But I am a realist too. I think the chances of our saving ourselves are only in the present climate of opinion about 1 in 10. Only if millions of ordinary people begin to want to find a better way of life and make a conscious effort to compel the governments to give them what they want will our grandchildren have any sort of bearable existence. And I have baby grandchildren. I want them to have a bearable existence. I want them, at the end of their lives, to be able to look back and think, my life was worthwhile. That is the only criterion by which we can judge a social system, that it makes people feel their lives are worthwhile. Our present social system does not do this. I put forward here for consideration one possible alternative. And that was the opening chapter from M W Thring's book, Man, Machines and Tomorrow. And okay, so it was written in the 80s, and he was talking about how things have been changing, but it has rapidly changed in the last 20 years. In 2020, 2021, we can see how different the world is, and it's not a creative society, using his words. It's not an ideal society where everyone's living together. And I don't mean these societies that's being offered by this great reset where we all live in the same way. As Thring's saying here, people should be allowed to have their individuality still, but also work with the community and live with the community so that everyone lives freely. Nobody's judged, there's no prejudices, and we all live a bearable existence. And what I find most important, we all need to know that our life is worthwhile. All lives matter, all lives are worthwhile living, and we want to make sure everybody is living a life that makes them feel worthwhile. So these are just ideas, of course, but we can put them out there to the world. Let's find a way of bringing the world together so that everybody's life is worthwhile.